Imagine if your country wiped its debt clean overnight. No borrowing, no deficits, no taxes. Paradise, right? But what if I told you that being debt-free could crash the banks, wipe out pensions, and actually collapse the economy? Welcome to the strange world of national debt, where governments borrow trillions. And somehow, the system thrives. Today, we're unpacking 6 hidden forces that keep every country in debt, and why this global debt spiral might not be a bug in the system. It might be the feature. Take Japan, and its debt is over 260% of GDP, the highest in the developed world. Yet its economy, stable, predictable, respected. Now take Sri Lanka. Debt closer to 120% of GDP, yet a full-blown collapse. Why? Because how much a country owes is only half the story. Stick around, because by the end, you'll see debt not as the enemy, but as the invisible engine modern civilization runs on. No politician wants to raise taxes or cut benefits. That's political suicide. But debt is magic. It lets leaders fund wars, build bridges, or send out stimulus checks, without causing immediate pain. In 2020, the US passed over $5 trillion in stimulus. The CARES Act alone poured $2 trillion into the economy, buying time, buying votes, and pushing the bill to the next generation. Politicians earned applause, but future taxpayers inherited the tab, and this is hardly unique to America. Argentina's governments have repeatedly borrowed to fund subsidies and public jobs during elections, creating short-lived booms that often end in defaults. In Greece, before 2008, generous pensions and benefits were funded by borrowing, not productivity. The popularity was immediate. The bill came later. In democracies, short election cycles reward short-term thinking. Debt becomes a way to win elections, not to govern responsibly. And it's not new. In 1940s Britain, war bonds funded the fight against Hitler. The cost? A national debt that peaked at over 250% of GDP. But no politician dared raise taxes during war. Even in peacetime, leaders use debt to promise prosperity now, knowing the consequences won't arrive until long after the next election. What looks like generosity is often debt in disguise. And that's why debt isn't just policy, it's politics. Which brings us to the next hidden force: how debt can create the illusion of stability even when the foundations are weak. When governments borrow to build schools and highways, it looks like progress. People feel safe, businesses invest, the economy hums along. But sometimes that prosperity is staged. It's stability theatre. Take Sri Lanka's Hambantota port. Built with Chinese loans, it was supposed to ignite trade, but revenues lagged, and when the government couldn't service the debt, it granted a 99-year lease to China merchants. That isn't just investment, that's a transfer of control. And it's not just Sri Lanka. Across the Belt and Road, you'll find glittering projects that don't pay for themselves. In Kenya, the Mombasa-Nairobi Railway cost about $4.7 billion US. It underperformed on freight revenues and helped push Kenya's public debt towards 70% of GDP. The ribbon cuttings felt like progress. The repayments told another story. Here's why the illusion works. Grace periods hide pain early, repayments hit years later. Foreign currency loans meet local currency revenues. One devaluation and the math breaks. Revenue guarantees mean that when usage disappoints, governments cover the shortfall. Private risk becomes public debt. It's like renovating your house on a credit card. For a while, it looks amazing. Then the statement arrives. But here's the hidden insight. Not every headline project is a trap. Some countries renegotiate their terms, cut bloated costs, or restructure repayments. Malaysia, for example, shortened and rescoped its East Coast rail link and cut billions from the bill. When debt funds projects that reliably generate returns, like efficient energy, logistics that lower costs, or education that lifts productivity, debt can shift from illusion to investment. So here's the rule of thumb. If the revenue's in local currency, the debt's in foreign currency, and the grace period is ending soon. What looks like prosperity may just be debt in disguise. And when the bill finally arrives, lenders don't just want their money back, they want influence. Which brings us to our next hidden force. Debt isn't just money, it's control. Debt isn't just money, it's leverage. And in the global economy, whoever controls the credit controls the policy. Institutions like the IMF and World Bank don't just lend, they attach conditions. These structural adjustments reshape economies. Take Greece. After the 2008 crisis, it received over 260 billion euros in bailouts. But the help came with strings: pension cuts, tax hikes, and wage reductions. The pain was real. Youth unemployment hit nearly 60%. Hospitals struggled with shortages, and many decisions were no longer made in Athens, but in Brussels and Washington. Argentina shows the same pattern. For decades, it has cycled through IMF loans, austerity, and defaults. In 2018, it took the largest IMF package ever, $57 billion. Yet inflation soared, poverty deepened, and public trust eroded. And this isn't unusual. Research shows that most IMF programs involve cuts to public spending, often hitting healthcare, education, or fuel subsidies. And that isn't abstract. It can mean fewer hospital beds, fewer teachers, and higher food prices in everyday life. For many nations, what begins as a lifeline can quietly become a leash. But here's the hidden agency. Debt doesn't always end in surrender. South Korea, during the Asian financial crisis, took a record IMF loan, restructured its banks, and repaid early in 2001, restoring credibility. Iceland, after its banking collapse, used IMF funds and strict capital controls to protect households, and repaid in 2015. The lesson? Debt isn't just a burden, it's leverage. And when nations understand that, they can use it as a tool for reform, not just control. Here's the twist. Debt isn't just allowed, it's required. Government bonds are the bedrock of global finance. They back pensions, they stabilize banks. They give central banks the tools to steer economies. The US has more than $28 trillion in treasuries held by the public. Foreign investors like Japan and China together hold well over $1 trillion. And by 2024, the US paid almost $900 billion in interest, more than the entire defense budget. And yet, investors keep buying. Why? Because US treasuries are still seen as the safest asset on earth. In fact, when global markets panic, investors don't flee treasuries, they rush into them. It's called a flight to safety. The worse the storm, the stronger the demand for debt. That's the paradox. What looks like a weakness is treated as strength. The bigger the US debt grows, the more the financial world depends on it. Without it, the system would seize. Banks, pension funds, insurance companies, even global trade, all rely on the predictable rhythm of government borrowing. Debt doesn't crash the system. Debt is the system. In fact, over 60% of global central bank reserves are held in US dollars, anchored by treasuries. Take away that debt, and you shake the foundation of world finance itself. So let's make it personal. How does debt play out where you live? Do your pensions, mortgages, or savings hinge on government bonds? Drop your country in the comments, and I might feature it in a future video. Now back to it with hidden force number 5. Capitalism only speaks one language: growth. If GDP doesn't rise each quarter, headlines panic, stock markets tremble, and politicians scramble. But real growth, productivity gains, innovation, technological breakthroughs takes time. And time doesn't win elections or satisfy investors. Debt is the shortcut. Governments borrow to fund tax cuts, build highways, or stimulate demand, boosting GDP today and pushing the repayment problem to tomorrow. Take Japan. Its population is shrinking, its workforce is aging, and growth has slowed compared to past decades. So Japan borrowed and borrowed and borrowed. By 2024, its debt to GDP ratio is over 260%, the highest of any developed nation, more than double what many economists consider sustainable. And yet, no collapse. No hyperinflation, no investor revolt. Japan still has a stable currency, low inflation, and strong demand for its government bonds. Why? Because the world is addicted to Japanese debt too. Pension funds, insurers, and other governments hold Japanese bonds because they're still seen as safe. But it isn't prosperity, it's inertia. Japan is essentially treading water, avoiding disaster, but unable to sprint. It's like being stuck on a treadmill. You're not falling, but you're not really moving forward either. And Japan is not alone. France, Italy, the UK all carry debt well over 100% of GDP. Their economies rely on borrowed momentum, just to stand still. Quick question for you. Is your country growing on real progress or on borrowed momentum? Drop it in the comments. Sometimes debt isn't about strategy, it's about avoidance. Governments borrow not to build, but to delay. Aging infrastructure, bloated bureaucracies, broken tax systems. These are expensive to fix. So instead of fixing them, leaders borrow and kick the can down the road. Take Argentina again. Since 1950, it has defaulted on its sovereign debt 9 times. In 2018, it accepted a record-breaking $57 billion IMF loan, the largest in IMF history. But instead of restructuring the economy, it bought time. Today, inflation runs at over 100%. 40% of citizens live in poverty, and the peso is in freefall. Then there's Zimbabwe. In the early 2000s, to manage mounting debt, it simply printed money. The result, one of the worst hyperinflations in history. By late 2008, prices were doubling every 24 hours. A loaf of bread could cost billions of Zimbabwean dollars. People carried sacks of cash just to buy groceries. Venezuela followed a similar path. In 2018, inflation crossed 1 million%. Shelves emptied, medicine vanished. Toilet paper became a black market item, all because the government tried to buy time without fixing the foundation. Debt, when used well, can finance progress, but used as a substitute for reform, it only delays the inevitable until the cracks break wide open. The real danger isn't instant collapse. It's leaders learning they can always buy time until time finally runs out. But borrowed time doesn't always end in collapse. Post-war Germany's 1953 London Debt Agreement cut and rescheduled obligations, tying repayments to exports and helping spark the Wirtschaftswunder or economic miracle. Brazil, once an IMF regular, took a 2002 package, stabilized its economy, and repaid early by mid-decade. The difference? They didn't just buy time, they used it to rebuild their foundations. Here's something almost nobody talks about. About 1/5 of the US national debt, roughly $7 trillion, isn't owed to China, Wall Street, or foreign investors. It's owed to itself. Departments like Social Security, Medicare, and federal retirement accounts lend surplus funds to the Treasury. Economists call this intra-governmental debt. Think of it like borrowing from your own retirement account to pay household bills. The money isn't gone, but it is spoken for. Here's how it works. The Treasury issues IOUs to these departments, which must eventually be repaid with interest. It's still debt, but instead of being owed abroad, it's owed to America's own future obligations. So when headlines scream about the $34 trillion debt mountain, remember, about $7 trillion of that is essentially internal bookkeeping. That means it won't trigger a foreign default or a global panic. But it is a quiet, ticking clock inside the US system, especially as baby boomers retire and those IOUs come due. It won't topple the world overnight, but it could strain America from within. And here's where I'd love your input. Should we unpack how US debt policy, like Trump's attempts to reduce it, ripples worldwide? Would you want me to dive into how that connects to gold, crypto, or even other countries' histories with the US? Tell me in the comments what you'd most like me to explore. It can be anything, and that's the hidden economics and forces I'll explore next. If debt is so dangerous, why not just pay it all off? On paper, it sounds responsible, like cleaning up after a big party. But in practice, it would trigger a financial earthquake. The US Treasury market is over $28 trillion, and it's the benchmark anchoring trillions more in mortgages, bonds, and global trade. Removing it would be like pulling the foundation out of a skyscraper. Banks use treasuries as collateral. Pension funds rely on them for stability. Central banks use them to steer monetary policy. Erase the debt, and you erase the very tools that make the financial system work. The result? Interest rates would spike, credit would dry up, and governments would have to slash spending or hike taxes almost immediately, triggering recessions and unrest. That's why the safest path isn't paying it off. It's managing it wisely. Debt is like fire. Dangerous when uncontrolled, but vital when harnessed. The myth of just paying it off sounds good on a campaign poster. But in the real world, it would set the economy ablaze. Debt isn't the glitch, it's the design. And if it vanished tomorrow, the system itself could collapse. So tell me in the comments, which force surprised you most and why? Subscribe to Hidden Economics for more breakdowns. And hit like to help more people discover this channel. Stay curious, stay sharp, decode the system. Play your own game. I'll see you in the next one.